I was waiting for it to cue in. Oh, hello everybody, and welcome back to We Are in the Golden Age. I'm your host Peter Ross of the Milk Family, and with us again tonight for this lecture slash discussion is Del Star. Thanks, Del Star, for tuning in.
Yeah, welcome for having me tune in.
Oh, absolutely, it's always a
Allowing me to
pleasure.
tune in is a better way to put it.
Well, it wouldn't be the same without you, I can tell you that. And tonight's episode is a very intriguing topic. It is the story how the Revelatorium revelations came to be. Now, this is very interesting. Del, please take it away.
All right, the long and short of this one is before long, one of the talks is going to be about the radionic ships of the heavenly host. Now, there's so much stuff out there about it, and so many different people running different kinds of, TV broadcasting. A lot of them are disputers, people whose role in being an interview is to show the fraud
Yeah.
and can be very aggressive and so on. So I'm kind of preempting that by this. How do you know all that? How do you know? Well, I'm going to be telling you how in this one. How's that? So that's basically the purpose of this one. It's all of the things that have happened accumulatively over a starting from the age of 12 on that have ended up to this interview. How's that? Okay.
Sounds great.
The
Everybody's excited.
Well, at the age of 12, I'd mentioned this one of the earlier talks that everybody receives an epiphany, which is to start them off on a path of spirituality rather than materiality with it. And by the age of 17 or 18, they've either accepted the mentalized illusion they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or something, or they accepted the epiphany um, push and don't know what they want to do. They're still looking, and that's good because that still leaves them open for higher spiritual attunements to steer them more and more into spiritual, humanitarian, that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
so my epiphany at the age of 12. Everybody receives an epiphany at the age of 12. So my epiphany at the age of 12 was I suddenly felt one afternoon really sleepy, so I grabbed a nap, and all of a sudden I was like basically in the passenger seat of a spaceship roaring through outer space like on the way to Orion, just
Yeah.
like a sci-fi movie. But it was the feeling that was there. It wasn't like what I saw, it's what I felt. It was like it was, I still remember. I mean, you can't really describe it. It was like the coldness of outer space, but the beauty of outer space and the purpose of going somewhere to do something. I mean, it was all there at the same. I was in a spaceship going to Orion, almost like literally. And I woke up and never forgot that particular feeling.
Yeah.
My I had a twin brother who passed a while back, sadly. But anyway, his epiphany was that he looked out the bedroom window one day and saw a UFO sitting over the telephone wires.
Wow.
And of course, everybody thought he was nuts. Now he had a chance. This is too bad. He had a chance of validating himself actually quite spectacularly because in the winter of that year, the largest downtown office building in Winnipeg at the time, which was the early 50s, was called the Time Building. It was a 10-story building. It was across the street from a 7-story block long or square Eaton's department store and catalog. In those days, you this was before malls,
Yeah.
segregated malls and so on. A department store did it, and people in the rural areas bought everything through the Eaton's catalog or Sears catalog. Same idea. That's how the farmers got their stuff. So this was a big building, and Portage Avenue was at the time, probably still, it was 4 lanes coming one way, 2 full tracks of streetcars. They still had streetcars in Winnipeg then, plus 4 more lanes coming the other way. So that's a very, very wide avenue downtown Winnipeg. The fire was so hot that it melted the windows in the Eaton's building across the street.
Yeah.
When the news hit, my brother said, "Oh, says, I dreamt all about that 2 years, 2 days ago." Well, if he had said it before the news, he was a hero. He would have shown because he was turned on at the age of 12. I wasn't turned on till I was 25. He was, the switch was in, so he was always considered off the wall. Down at the age of 18, I went into his bedroom and he had candles, incense, Star of David in the middle of the floor, and so on. And he was studying the Rosicrucian stuff, And of course, I'm still out there playing football and rugby. But anyway, that was the second, his sighting of the UFO was the second little push. And then the third one was three-dimensional, and this was an important one too, because that Christmas, my parents were from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and my grandparents both lived in Moose Jaw. So we spent the Christmas holidays in Moose Jaw with grandparents on my mother's side, and one of the uncles took us out rabbit hunting, the uncle thing, and gave us all 22s, so on. And there I am out in the middle of this rabbit warren. They're white now because it's the middle of the winter. There's a white rabbit probably 6 feet away at the end of my rifle. I'm shaking like a leaf, pointing straight at it, and I shot. And I went over to pick it up, and it hopped away. I had missed it completely. I was so overwhelmingly relieved. I've never had a gun in my hand since, and that's a 100% true story. I've never, even just to play or target practice or whatever, I've never had a gun in my hand since that time. Same with fishing. I stopped fishing. Anything to do with harming animals, and then I stopped completely. Well, that was part of my my process towards spirituality, which at the time I was, of course, completely oblivious to. And I went all the way up until the early, like 1965, 64, and so on. I was in university. I did all that. I was still an athlete. I did rugby, I did football. I was doing math. I was doing philosophy. I was very, very good at chess, very, very good at bridge. My best game was Go, the Japanese game Go. Yeah. And I was also very good at poker. I did all those things. The only thing I never did in my life was I never was one-on-one. I never did tennis or golf or any of the mano-a-mano kind of sports. It was always team sports or games and so on. All of a sudden at the same time, just like that, I stopped all of them. At the exact same time. I just stopped everything like that. I didn't know why at the time. That in 2062, hippies had started to come online. But I remember sitting out in front of the UBC library, which had a big concrete patio out front, tiled patio with 4x4 planters. Yeah. They're about 2.5 feet high, and everybody could sit around the edges of the planters and read their books or have a lunch, whatever. And I was sitting on one of them, reading one of my textbooks. And all of a sudden, a really, really strange kind of a feeling overcame me, like now I know it's an induction, but I had this suddenly totally different kind of a new sensation, lasted for about a minute or two or three. And about 6 weeks later, my eyes had changed completely from dark brown to the green blue that they are now. Well, of course, I assumed that because my eyes had changed, my consciousness had changed, because I also started thinking about off-world things for the first time. At that point, I still believed that mankind came out of the oceans. I was 100% atheist, but at that point, things started to change. Well, I now know, of course, that my eyes changed colors because my consciousness had changed. But anyway, that was the start. I started going to folk clubs, and now by the middle of the 60s, I was now in a mining business and so on. And there was when we were, I guess, in the early 1960s, we lived up near the University of British Columbia up at 16th and Sassmat. A couple of doors down the street, there was a set of twins that were friends of my younger brother. Well, they went to university, and one of them, Cameron, one of them went to UBC and got a degree in mining engineering. Well, now I have a mining company in 65, and I get the monthly BC Mining Journal or whatever it was called, once a month. And I opened it one day, and there's a story that Cameron told, the mining engineer. He was up at a mining site on the shore of a lake, and he saw a UFO come in. Down came the pipe, up came the water, and off it went. Well, I knew the kid, and I knew he wasn't a BSer. So that was kind of sort of where I first accepted. Yeah, well, I didn't say, "Oh boy, there's UFOs," but I said, "Yeah, that's probably true." Anyway, I started going through a fairly substantive consciousness change. I started going to the hippie things. They were called happenings.
Yeah.
They'd have the wherever they call them, the light shows, with the globes and stuff, and the rock and roll bands. I started doing that, and I eventually ended up leaving. I turned over my mining stuff to my board of directors to say my hair was now a little longer,
Yeah.
and I said, for reasons you can probably understand, I have lost my interest in this. It's all yours. Do well, hope, so on. And I ended up being a hippie in it, but not of it. And then the opportunity came along for the club in Vancouver that was running the weekend psychedelic shows, like down in San Francisco and so on, on a much smaller scale. The guy that was running that had decided to go back to university, so he handed me the keys. So I ran. He called it the Afterthought. I called it White Rabbit, and I ran it for about 6 months. Never made a dime out of it. The place was packed every night, but there was only this much money in the till. So where were they all coming from? See, so I posted guards at the back doors and everything. It didn't help. The place was still packed, and there was still this money in the till. But anyway, two of the guards ended up being excellent musicians in their own right. So I started hiring them with I'd bring in a bass player, bring in a guitar player, and so on, as the house band, and then I'd bring in the name bands to go in behind them. Well, one day the house band was out of sight. I mean, just everything was just there. It clicked, and I said, "There's a band." So that was it. I handed the Afterthought or the White Rabbit on to somebody else, and we're now Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. Now, I didn't come up with a name. One of the guards had come from Toronto across, and he was lying on his back out in the prairies by Saskatoon, and all of a sudden it hit him. Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, perfect name for a band. Well, that was, so we were called Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. And if I had known what I know now, it would have been another Beatles, but I didn't. And I wasn't a juggler type guy anyway. I blew that opportunity really wholesale. But we had been about a year into it, and a guy showed up. Now, of course, this is hippie stuff. We're into spirit, like the band songs were all based on the spiritual stuff, on the spiritual side. And hippies per se were also fairly well tuned into the spiritual stuff. So it was already starting to become part of the composite background, I remember in 70, well, I'm jumping ahead on this one. Anyway, his name was Richard. A guy showed up. He was in T-shirts, blue jeans, long blonde hair down to his shoulders, very, very light blue eyes, not big, never wore shoes, bare feet. And he sat down one night and said, "Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck is bringing through a new frequency of music." Well, our music was different. I already knew that, but I didn't know why. Well, he said it had started with the Beatles, bringing through a female form of music that was based on higher frequency consciousness rather than the lower frequency and so on. Yeah. And when the girl came into the Beatles, that cut that off. So it went to the Buffalo Springfield, who came out with a couple of good songs, but their ego conflicts spoiled that. So it went to the Loving Spoonful. This is what he was explaining. It went to the Loving Spoonful. Well, they were a folk rock group out of San Francisco. They did Come On People, Let's Get Together. So, but they were sitting in a recording studio in New York in the afternoon, and all of a sudden the piano player started doing a little riff. 2.5 later, they had it recorded, and a couple of days later, it was on the radio. It was called "Summer in the City." Da 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 da. Really driving. It was to get them started. Well, the lead, the head guy or the lead for Loving Spoonful didn't want to break away from the folk singing thing they were doing, so it moved over to Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, it was no accident these guys got brought together, as the house band in the White Rabbit, because put together, he said, the band that's going to take it to conclusion, the one that'll eventually run with it, is at this point or at this moment being trained up in the mountains, getting their stuff together. Well, that was as far as he took it. See, but I did know at this point too that Richard knew stuff that I didn't. I mean, he knew stuff what's going on with the fourth dimension. He saw things that I didn't, that kind of stuff. So there was something going on there. You see, well, now I am no longer with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. This is 1970. I'm up in Harrison Hot Springs. Again, just beforehand, I should mention I had an enormous epiphany, a nighttime epiphany in June. I might as well tell a pretty cute story here at this point. There's two. Now, this is not per se on the spiritual path, but it ties into them because they are so far out of normal, when I was talking about the epiphany at the age of 12, we lived in Fort Garry in Winnipeg. And then in 1953, we moved to River Heights in Winnipeg, and to a 3-story narrow red house that had been owned by a doctor, at the Winnipeg hospital who had retired. Well, my brother and I had the upstairs for the 3rd floor, there was 2, rooms, and we had the 2 rooms. Well, it started more and more and more to get kind of like nervous there. I kept starting to fear that I would see a face in the window, and then I would start getting fearful that I would become so fearful I would see a face in the window and that stuff. And I used to see also cat's eyes all the time. When I shut my eyes, I'd see cat's eyes all over the place floating around. Well, I know now that's the 100% pure sign of psychic imposition going on, like entities around when you see the cat's eyes floating around. So anyway, this kind of stuff was going on. Well, anyway, one night I was hitting the sack about 11. I'm in grade 11, beginning of grade 11. And I looked over in the corner, and there was a 5-foot-tall skeleton standing in the corner, shimmering away there. Well, I went out of the covers, and 20 minutes later, it came out and it was gone. I forgot to mention, too, that when we first moved into the place, the basement was segregated into a number of different rooms, furnace room, laundry room, and fruit cellar. I went into the fruit cellar, so I was looking around, and I call them green apple vibes, green prickly vibes, the back, like whoosh, they're really prickly, and I call them green. For some reason, they come to me as greeny feeling. The same as you get something in your teeth, you get that greeny feeling in your green feeling, well, it's the same idea. Anyway, I got this really big green whoosh up back, and there's a bunch of jars sitting on the shelves with preserves in them. Well, I picked one up, and it wasn't a preserve, it was a bone with a screw in it. And I checked, and there were all different bones from different parts of the body with screws in them. Yeah. See? Well, anyway, it turns out that the doctor had been one of the pioneers of using screws to set bones to make them heal faster.
Yeah.
And this collection that he'd left was part of his experiments. Kind of a grisly thing to have come across. But anyway, that's where the entity was. It was attached to one of those jars, hadn't let go. I figure it was probably a 10 or 12-year-old kid because it was 5 feet. Anyway, so we moved in 1955 from Winnipeg to Vancouver.
Yeah. In
1967, Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck gets started. And the lead singer, who's singing now with the Guess Who, was from Winnipeg. His name is Donnie McDougall. So the next summer, we had started a trip to Toronto for promotion and so on, and we ended up spending about 6 weeks in Winnipeg on a holiday kind of thing. Well, we're over at Donnie's family. There were 7 of us, the 5 musicians, myself, and the road manager, the equipment manager. We're all over at Donnie's family's house one afternoon, sitting around doing nothing, trying to figure out something to do, And Donnie said, "Hey, why don't we go to the haunted house?" Well, apparently, before he had left Winnipeg, he was running around with some of the musicians. For example, a couple of the Guess Who, And those four of them had lived in a, quote, the haunted house. Very trippy for hippies, you see. So, hey, far out, let's go. So, hey, we all up in the car and off we went. And I noticed that we had come over the Red River, and then I noticed that we're starting. And then I suddenly picked on the right, we're heading into the River Heights direction. And then sure enough, we're obviously headed into River Heights. And I said, Donnie's sitting in the back seat. I said, we're not going to 256 Montrose Avenue, are we? Now, excuse me for this, but I can't say it any other way. Don went straight up to his feet in the back and said, how the fuck did you know that? I mean, just think, I only known the guy for a year. He knew nothing about me. He knew zero about the path. And I nailed the haunted house that he was telling us we're just going to see for the first time. How the fuck did you know that? So it was a haunted house, and I had seen a skeleton. See, so it's the long and short of that. Now, in the fall of 69, we parted ways. My inability to get things moving properly was, and I'm now living at Rochdale College, in downtown Toronto. And about 2 days later, I had just set the band up with a rehearsal studio in the old King Hotel on East King Street in Toronto, where it stopped being a hotel and was renting out rooms for artists and artisans, like a model artist, bands, that kind of stuff. So I'd set them up with a room for rehearsal. And there's a knock on the door, and it's Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck Stand. Says, "Where's our equipment?" I said, "What do you mean, where's your equipment?" He says, "Well, somebody stole our equipment last night. Where is it?" Because I was the obvious. Anyway, I was now tagged as the thief of their band equipment. Well, what can you do? See. So in June, I went back. Actually, in April, I went back to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Of 70. And I was in June. I was hitchhiking. I didn't have a car. I was still hippie did it, and I was hitchhiking up Broadway Street, at the West End, and a white van pulled in, picked me up. There's a driver, there's a girl in the front seat, and a guy, sitting on the floor in the back seat where I'm sitting. And the guy takes off down Broadway Street, looks over his shoulder, and says, "Where's Main Street?" Well, Main Street is the main South North Street of Vancouver. Obviously, he wasn't from Vancouver. I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Oh, I'm from Toronto. We just got in here at 11:30 this morning." This is about 2 p.m. Well, I said, "Oh, far out. I lived in Toronto last year. I was managing Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck." The guy turns it back and says, "Oh, far out. My buddy stole all their equipment." So try and figure out the odds of that. Like there's 5 million people in Toronto and 3.5 million people in Vancouver, and a guy picks me up, and he knows the guy that stole the equipment. He said, "You never would have got it. It was all set up." He said his girlfriend was pregnant, wanted to go back down to the States, so they boosted your stuff. Within 24 hours, it was already fenced, across the border in Detroit. He said, "You never would have got it." But anyway, far out. My buddy stole all their equipment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm talking about that kind of stuff has happened, a fair amount. So anyway, now in June, I went up to a commune at Nakusp on the Arrow Lakes, just to go to the commune at Nakusp. And there was a big, it had a bunch of small cabins all over the place, plus a big log mainframe, beautiful building, actually, mainframe. It had about 10 or 12 bunks,
Yeah.
and a big wood burning pot-bellied stove in the middle, which is how it was heated in the winter. And the houses were interesting. They were made out of 2x4s, but they had propylene plastic sheets on the inside and the outside, so the air in between was, and they could live at 40 below in the winter with a little pot-bellied stove in the winter. And of course, that whole idea got adopted by greenhouses all over the place. That got into the idea, instead of these expensive glass and polyethylene sheets, worked just fine, as insulating for building materials. It was quite innovative. Anyway, there was a small 2 or 3 acre farm about half a mile up the mountainside from the commune. I decided one night to grab my sleeping bag and go out and spend the night, just to look under the stars. I hadn't had a chance to do that for a long time. Well, I did that, fell asleep, and then I had probably one of the most powerful nocturnal visions I've ever had. It was prescient. Um, it was like I was coming across the field into a small observatory, like an observatory dome.
Yeah.
When I went inside, it was like a TARDIS, from Doctor Who. It's a telephone booth. When you go inside, it's the big control center of a huge time machine, time ship. So you go in and here, and it was like there was a balcony all the way around, people in chairs at desks, or all the way around, and there was a black-eyed fellow with black curly hair and a really pretty blonde-haired girl with blue eyes. She's about 25 or so, and they were running, some kind of a means testing situation. So we were given like a test. Like I wish I could, but a good example is, thinking outside the box. You're given the night, and you have to join them but you have to go outside the box to do it. If you got it, you stayed. If you didn't get it, poof, 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 you're gone from the chairs. And over the series of these tests being given and so on, it kept winnowing down until there was finally just a couple of dozen left. And then I woke up. So in the fall of 1970, I had moved up to Harrison Hot Springs to start. I decided to write that was my first writing.
Yeah.
I called it Androma Incorporated. The guy was handing out business cards that said Androma Incorporated on one side and an address on the other. And when you went, you got invited to go through one of these sessions. And then at the end of it, what would happen is that the small group that's winnowed left, all of a sudden they would fuse in the diamond white soul atom. This is what I wrote in 70, would rise up and poof, go to Andromeda. That's why it's called Andromeda Incorporated. Well, yeah. I knew nothing about what I know now, even about the new creation. I knew nothing about it, but I was getting in front. It was coming through in front, see. So yeah. I had written about 250 pages all by hand. I'd moved up to Harrison Hot Springs, where I could, rented a little cabin at the Harrison Hot Springs, which they rented out for peanuts in the winter. And there's a knock on the door one night, and that's where I wrote this. I just kept rewriting it, expanding it, rewriting it, and expanding. And it was a dishwasher from the Harrison Hot Springs. The Harrison Hot Springs Hotel at the time was a world famous, basically Jewish resort. It sat right on top of a famous hot spring, and then the water from that was funneled down in town, and there was a hot spring downtown where the plebeians could go and do hot springs too. See. Anyway, he said he heard that there was a guy here that had, he was interesting to talk to, so did he mind would he mind if he came over now and then and we just sat and BS? I don't know. So maybe once or twice a week he'd come over and we just sit and chew the fat, but nothing in particular. Anyway, one day, my friend Richard that I had mentioned before, that had told me all about what Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck was up to, showed up at Harrison. He was on his way up to the Northwest Territories. He was to stay overnight. Well, there was a house that had been built by a contractor with his own hand. It was meticulously built. I mean, every joint was perfect. But he wasn't living in it. He hadn't rented it out. There was no power, no running water and stuff like that. And it was filled with hippies, because hippies always know a good thing. See, but the good thing about it was that at 5 o'clock or dinner time, a bunch of us would hit the house, bring whatever we could, if we had potatoes or peas or whatever we could, because they had what was called a farmer's soup, big pot. Everything from yesterday was, and you threw in today what you had, and that was your soup for the day. It was called a farmer's soup, and that's how farmers did it on the prairies for years. These soups could run for years. Just every day you add to it, and every day you add to it, and so on. So anyway, Richard was going to stay there overnight. Anyway, the three of us, this is Ron, Richard, and myself, we're sitting in the living room in a triangle. Literally, the three chairs were facing each other in a perfect triangle. We're BSing away in the clear blue sky. Richard said, So where's the little white guy come from? Well, like Ron had been pushed whammo, like a, dummy doll, right over on his back, leaps to his feet and, how do you, she says, well, it's sitting right there on your shoulder. And of course, I'm blink, blink, blink because I see F all, blink, blink, blink. Anyway, he says, yeah, ever since I was 10, this is the little white guy with a long white beard. He's been sitting up there and I started having epileptic fits afterwards when he showed up, see. But he said he's been there ever since, on and off. He's not there all the time, but, Rich, well, he's there right now, see. So anyway, about 3 days later, Rich is now gone. About 3 days later, somebody from the house told me that Ron had had a grand mal seizure and was now in the hospital at Aldergrove. Wow. And a day later, the report was that he was unconscious. He'd come out of the seizure and started mumbling. It was awful. It was terrible. There were armed soldiers on a main street of, downtown Canada. There was everywhere. They're all over the place. It was terrible. It was terrible. The next day, Pierre Trudeau declared martial law in downtown Montreal because of the Federalist, whatever it was, threat. They'd murdered one of the ministers in Quebec. So he declared martial law and put an armed soldier on every street corner in downtown Montreal. Ron had seen it in advance.
Yeah.
Okay. The day before. Completely exactly. He'd seen it. So now we're up in Harrison Hot Springs and I used to go in about every couple of weeks to Vancouver to get my supplies, like a prospector coming to town to get my poke for the next couple. Anyway, there was posters gone up about a lecture series that was going to be given. It'd be about the middle of December. Ron and I decided we'll come in and go to that. See, so we came in, sat down. I had at this point, and I need to bring this because it's fairly important. Starting about 2 years before, even while I was still with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, I started to get a compulsive need to know everything I could find out about the Luciferian rebellion. Read the Revelations 8 times. What the heck is Lucifer? What the heck is the rebellion? There was little bits and pieces, fragments here and there, but no actual picture or anything about it. But I read everything I could possibly find out about the Lucifer stuff. See, well, we came in and sat down in the lecture. The guy walked over to the blackboard and said, "We are now in the cleanup in the aftermath of the Luciferian self-rebellion of the cosmic overplus." Of course, I sat straight up because that was targeted straight at me, and away he went. Anyway, at the end of the lecture, he said, he called Ron and I, he said, "I want you guys to come back tomorrow about 7, bring chalk, incense, and a candle." This was it was a church auditorium, big, huge, flat floor, seat like 300-400 people. It was quite big. Anyway, we come in. And he draws a Star of David in the middle of the floor, puts the candle, the incense in it, lights the candle, lights the incense, and says to Ron, "All right, I want you to stand in here." And then he steps in there with him and starts hollering his head off, "Back to the pit from where you came." Whoop, 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 whoop. I said, "What the heck was that?" He said, "Well, Solomon had confined 7 demons to a bottle. And if you go through Kings, you'll actually go through the whole thing of Solomon talking to them one at a time, interviewing them, and then into the bottle they go. Well, Balthasar was one of them, and they all had gifts. They all had gifts to, for humanity and so on. And his gift to humanity was the gift of prophecy."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, that little white guy on Ron's shoulder was Balthasar." And he says, "I don't know how he got up, but I put him back." Well, Richard saw him. This guy knew who he was and what to do about it. There's a big difference, see. So that was another, so I and of course the Luciferian self-rebellion. So I paid a lot of attention to this fellow. Well, now he's got us in the beginning of January, middle of January. He has us coming to a weekend seminar lecture called Translation. There's a chapter near the end of the Revelatorium book called Translations, which is, from this particular episode.
And it's very important.
Yeah, it is. You need to read it. It helps to get rid of your negative conditions, plus help get rid of some of the negative conditions on the planet, because that's what it was for. Anyway, so there was a coffee break at about 7:30 in the evening and so on, and they were being held on the second floor of an apartment building off Kingsway on the way to New Westminster in Vancouver, and off the kitchen was a small balcony. So three of us went out on the balcony for fresh air. There was a 6'9" Sasquatch. They're the gentlest and shyest people on the planet. I've mentioned that. And there was a young girl from Colombia, Ecuador. She's from Ecuador. And it was really low overcast. It was light, from the city, but it was very, very low overcast. And she was and we were talking about UFOs. And she was saying, she had her hand over her head, and she said, every time I saw a UFO down in Ecuador, I'd get a buzz over the top of and she got that far, and she was swirling the hand over her head. And I saw a saber jet starting to sail by, with this wet-back wings, but there was no sound from the jet trail. I went back, there's the jet, went back, no jet trail. At that instant, the door opened, and the guy stuck his head out with a great big grin and said, "Did you see it? Did you see the flying saucer?" And went back in. Whoa. He was connected. See, so now you need to listen to him even more closely. See, so that was the first time I saw. I'm talking now to people who say, "How do you know there are UFOs?" Well, that was the first one I saw. The second one was in June. By now, I was living with one of the fellows from the classes. We had an apartment in the second floor of a big old rooming house downtown Vancouver. And he was an unbelievably good artist, so he had a big painting going on the living room wall and so on. But one afternoon, I was upstairs talking with my brother in the apartment, and he was downstairs outside doing something. All of a sudden, he came pounding into the room out of breath and said, "Hurry, hurry, there's a UFO right overhead, hurry, hurry, hurry." Well, the street that this house was on was all high rises. It's like a canyon. All you can see is a strip of blue overhead with this house sitting over here, but otherwise it's just a strip. And so I went down about 6 steps at a time out the door. Sure enough, right there, just like a great big, huge, brilliant silver white M&M sitting right in the middle of the canyon, right overhead. At that instant, my brother came tumbling out and said, "Where is it? Where is it?" And it was gone. It went sideways, over the high rise. So he wasn't supposed to see it, because that's the way these things work. There wasn't a ship up there. There was a projection of visibility by the ship into a third dimensional visibility. A baseball would have gone through it, but they do that for people to reinforce their beliefs in UFOs, and now you don't doubt. Well, that was my second time. The third time was that summer. The guy took about 35 of us down to English Bay, second beach, I guess it's called, in English Bay in downtown Vancouver for an afternoon outing. And he says, if you're really sharp, you might see a UFO or two. Well, the sky was overcast from the far end of Georgia Strait to the far bottom of Georgia Strait with broken glass. I'm talking about lines, cloud lines like what we would now call chemtrails. Yeah. But crisscrossing all over the place. It was literally like broken glass as far as the eye could see. Now, I noticed that broken glass, but I didn't go further with it. See, nobody saw a UFO. That was the end of it. Well, now I know, if you read the book, The Radionic Ships, it talks about the radionic clouds. Well, if you have 2 radionic clouds crisscrossing, you got broken glass. Well, there must have been about 2 dozen of them up there, because the whole sky was broken glass, one end to the other. Yeah. So that was basically the third time. Now, in 94, I was now down in Denver with them for about 8 or 9 months. He was giving lectures now down in Denver, and some of us had gone down to help, do posters and that kind of stuff. And so in September, we're slated to go back up north. So that morning he had a barbecue, like a goodbye or farewell barbecue in his backyard. Clear blue sky in all directions except straight overhead, about 1,000 feet up. There was a perfect shimmering cucumber, like a sausage cloud, or they call it, but it was just, shimmering around the edges. And that was the only cloud there. That was it. Of course, we all kind of, nobody said anything, but And about 11:30, I said, "Well, all right, it's time to go." And we hopped in the van. We went north the highway out of Denver. He and his wife came out in their station wagon right behind us to give us a send off. The cloud was right overhead of the car, right over top of the car. About 40 miles out, they tooted away, cut a U-ey, and back into Denver, and the cloud went back in with them, still hooked up. I forgot to mention too that this vision I'd had up in the cusp, with a black-haired guy with the black frizzy eyes and the blue-eyed girl. Well, when this family thing got started, the black-haired, curly-haired guy was obviously the guy in the dream. I mean, I spotted that the instant I saw him. He was the guy. But no sign of the blonde, blue-eyed girl. Well, about 2.5 years later, he said, "I'm going to go down to California for a couple of days. I'm going to bring back some new members of the family." He comes back, and there's the blue-eyed, blonde-haired lady, who was actually his soulmate. And even though soulmates are usually just a couple of years apart, she had been lost in the Second World War in a boat going across the English Channel. So she had to make an emergency incarnation. Well, that made her about 25 or 30 years younger than him. But it was absolutely, see, I had no problem with what was going on because I had already seen them in advance that it was coming, And the whole idea of the idea that these people were all sitting around and were being given means tests, and if you failed, you were gone. Blink. This whole family action was a purification process, and if you transgressed or missed the boat in any way, shape, or form, you were out.
Yeah.
So it was exactly the same process of winnowing down, and it was successful. It was said at the beginning that I said this before, that if 6 strong men and women come back into Christ's alignment, the job will be done, because at that time the west coast of U.S. was, foretold to sever off in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Well, there was about 15 altogether that got to enough degree of consciousness stability that when the grand harmonic convergence happened in 82, the energies were held properly, and the west coast didn't fall off. Still hasn't, and isn't likely to. But anyway, that's going back a wee bit there. But there was the blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl. She'd come in due course. So now the next step regarding UFO, and now I have to go back to a step with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck. This is before I ended up doing the book in Harrison Hot Springs, because this was the summer before. We were making another trip to Toronto, and we were driving across the South Highway through Creston and Nelson and all of those places. So we're now at the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide is all the way up and down North America. It's where water goes this way on one side and it goes this way on the other. That's the Continental Divide. So at Creston, you did this, and now you're at the top, and then you're going down the other way. Well, right at the top, there was a big flat area with a very large Husky service station, gas, dozens and dozens of transport trailers would be parked on the side, the guys sleeping. So we pulled in there to get gas, have a meal, and all of that. And as we're coming out, 4 guys came over to us, on the way to our van, and said, "Yeah, we're the crosstown bus from Nelson." They pointed to their van, which is just over there. Said, "We saw you guys from Nelson. I just wanted to say hello." And da-da-da-da. Well, that was the band that was being trained up in the mountains, i.e. Nelson is in the mountains. Well, they eventually moved out of Crosstown Bus, became the Amethyst Star family, because the part of this that I didn't explain, when Richard said, the band is being raised up to bring through the new female form of music. Well, there was an atom. He told me where it was from, and I can't to my life remember, but there was the soul atom that was resident, that was conducting the orchestra, telepathically. I used to hear the bass player play his bass lines before he played it. It used to freak me out a bit, What right do I have to be, but I used to actually literally hear the bass line, but then the bass player would see. But I was holding the this guy, whoever it was, the musician from some planet in the fifth dimension. Beautiful music. I mean, I still remember it, and it's one of my things to do is to maybe try and resurrect some of it through a tape demo or something if I can. But anyway, it had been with the Beatles. It had moved from the Beatles to Mother Tucker's, and while we're up there on Creston, it had hopped over to the crosstown bus and got them started as the Amethyst Star family. And the Amethyst Star family went all the way through to 75. But the way this music was to be done is that it's like a jam session. You know what the chord changes are supposed to be, how the song goes and everything, but you don't play the same thing twice in a row. The way rock is done, symphony orchestra, every note is meticulously memorized and played exactly the same. All a band can do is play it with more precision. Yeah, exactly. Is more and more. That's the male way of doing it. The female way of doing it is that you play with the frequencies of the moment coming through. So it's like a jam session. And as the frequencies of the moment are never the same 2 ticks in a row, you can't play the particular musical lines the same way 2 nights in a row. That was the way it's supposed to have been. Well, one of the musicians in Amethyst would find it was a bass player. He would find a bass line, and there were nice bass lines, and no disqualifying there. But he would like them, and he'd latch onto them, he'd freeze on them, and it wasn't letting the energy come through.
Yeah.
So in 75, the whole interdimensional telepathic input into the higher frequencies of music in humanity was discontinued, and instantly in this wake showed up your punk rock, dirty stuff, the Sex Pistols all over. And that's basically the mode of music. The real hard male side is still in place. If you listen to today's rock music, it's basically just hypnotic chants. They don't even sing anymore. They just chant, and the music is always, almost literally always hypnotic, like Tom Tom's only musical, it's very robotically, hypnotically, negative male. You feel it through the solar plexus instead of through the heart. So that's what happened with it never got publicly known. So now we're talking about from the outer family thing was sort of dissolved at the end of the 80s, and I ended up moving to Ottawa, where my twin brother was living. Oh, I forgot to tell you a little amusing story too. The first lecture that I'd gone to, the Luciferian Rebellion. Well, when we came back the second day, my twin brother had come with me. Well, he'd known this fellow for almost 10 years, and he kept telling me about it. Yeah. And my brother was writing a novel, and I thought this was a character in his novel that he was telling me about, what this guy was going to be doing in the novel. And he was actually talking about this fellow. Anyway, we sat down, and the guy started talking, and all of a sudden, literally, the chalk went about 3 feet in the air, the twins, because there was my brother and I, because he'd been told in advance there would be twins showing up, my brother and I.
Yeah.
And twins, chalk went straight up in the air and back into his hand. So now we're living in Ottawa, and I did nothing for, I stayed under wraps literally for that whole time. I talked to very few people about what I knew. I didn't read anything whatsoever. Shouldn't say that exactly. I read The Dweller of Two Worlds by Philos the Tibetan, which is something you should read because its account of Atlantis, which is one of the original, is very, 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 very good. I had also read New Revelations by William Ferguson that came through him in 39 and published in 54 by the Cosmic Circle of Fellowship, but that's been disbanded, or the circle, but the book since 59. You probably wouldn't be able to find a copy, but I found a copy sitting learned about a copy of it in a library in one of the seminars, religious seminars in the States, and they gave me the address of and there was an 88-year-old original secretary still mailing out the books. You send a donation. You didn't buy the book. You send a donation. So I do have a copy of this new revelations. And what he'd done is redid the current or the old original revelations, but in the new language. So it was more or less the same structure from one end to the other, but not, in English, Elizabethan English. It was, in the type of language that the Revelatorium is in now, because it's from the same source.
Yeah.
Anyway, long and short, I spent most of the time in Ottawa without doing anything about anything. But but we're noticing these clouds all the time, without, tweaking on them. And about the early part of 1990, my brother out of the clear blue sky said, he says, those are UFOs. Those are radionic ships, the clouds. Oh, well, I started taking a couple of photos. I would buy disposable panoramic cameras, and then I'd stitch them together with tape, and there was your thing. Well, I did that for I maybe got about 6 or 8 of them. Then for some reason, again, I stopped, doing the photographs.
Yeah.
And I'll jump ahead with this a bit. When I moved my brother passed from cancer, unfortunately, and I guess I might as well tell you about that one. In March of 2013, he had spent a year and a half up in Prince Rupert in 78, 79, before he'd moved to Ottawa. And the railway had dropped all of the old telegram or teletype telephone wires and so on into the ditches. And they were all cloth covered from the 20s and 30s, the old way of doing it they were cotton covered with dioxins, soaked in dioxins to keep them waterproof.
Yeah.
So dioxins turned out to be extremely carcinogenic. They found that out in the late 80s, but at that time they didn't know about that. So my brother spent the whole summer wading up to his waist in these ditches pulling out copper wire, because that was when metal prices had spiked sky high. Yeah. So he was fishing out the wires for the copper metal. So he actually set himself up for cancer. Well, he fought it off rather well all the way through, because in the late fall of 2011, he started getting extreme pain in one of his legs, like when he put his weight on it. I thought he'd strained a groin or something. Well, by about June, he was walking with a walker, and then he decided to go and get an MRI and stuff done. So he was coming down the stairs of our apartment. We were on the 3rd floor. Didn't have a elevator, and it was marble floors. But kids had been playing just a couple of stairs up from the hallway, and it left water on it. Well, he was coming down with his crutches, and like a stupid idiot, I was behind him, not in front. Anyway, out went the crutches, down he went. He fell down about 2 steps, which should have given him a bruise, but it snapped his thigh bone, which is you have to drop 20 feet because it's the biggest bone on the body.
Yeah. So
when they took a look at why it snapped, they found a golf ball size area that was brittle like glass, which had exploded. See?
Yeah.
They also found out on the other side a golf ball size soft that was like mush. And that was the one that was giving him pain every time he put his weight on it. Of course, it would compress and sit the nerves off. So they discovered from that he had lung cancer. It was short cell sickle cell, which is the one you don't want because that's the one that comes back. He had glandular cancer and he had brain cancer. Of course, he had the bone cancer. So it was, and he went through radiation treatments for the glandular and the brain, which they deemed successful. Then he started to undergo chemo for the lung cancer. Well, chemo is you go through 3 days in a row, boom, boom, boom. You wait 10 days, then you go through another 3, boom, boom, boom. You wait 10 days and you go to the third 3. Well, at the end of that third one, you're either done or you're not, If you're done, everybody has a big celebration for you and so on. If you're not, well, it was sorry about that. You got 6 more weeks, Anyway, he went through the first 3 just fine. He went through the first of the second, and the next morning he was 100% vegetable. I mean, probably 10% of his consciousness was left. He couldn't stand without me holding him up. Yeah. He couldn't turn to the left or the right without me turning him. I mean, he was just so straight back into the hospital, and he never come back out. Now, he did something. He'd been doing particle physics using a pocket calculator and this little formula they worked out. Over the years, for example, he had predicted 3 times what's called the fine structure constant. To so many significant, I think it was like 5 significant figures, and then a year or 2 later, the physicists with their supercomputers would crank out the same number, and it was the same number as his. Then he did it, and a couple of years, he did it 3 times. Then he'd come out with a 6 significant figure, and a couple of years later, out would come theirs. His 6. So he was doing the right thing with this pocket calculator. Anyway, he had me bring him a pocket calculator and one of these notepads and a pencil and paper. And in about 10 days, he had the entire electron structure, which I still have, and it's up on the website at the back end of the Intelligent Design for those of you that want to look at it, because it needs somebody to take his notes in his writing with his language and turn it around into conventional particle physics terminology, because there's the entire electron structure, which nobody has yet. But he pulled the whole thing through. It was the last thing that he was basically given to do, because then he passed a couple of months later in his sleep, and that was that. Anyway, so because the 2 of us have been living together, sharing our incomes and so on, and then he's gone, I couldn't keep the show going the way I had been in Ottawa. A friend in Brantford that we'd known since the mid-'80s was living in an apartment in Brantford, and his mother had just passed, so he had an open room. So he said, well, come on here. He said, it'll only cost you so much a month. You can use my car whenever you want. You don't have to worry about the internet or heating or any of that kind of stuff. Well, I couldn't pass that up. That's how I ended up being in Brantford. Well, I was there from the beginning of February all the way around to April of 2014, and I never saw a radionic cloud.
Wow.
Boo-hoo-hoo. I left it all behind in Ottawa. I'm out of the loop now. Boo-hoo-hoo. Well, I got an email from an internet friend in Uganda, Kampala, Uganda, that had picked up on the Revelatorium roughly about 2009, and we've been communicating ever since. But he was aware of the nocturnal stuff like I was, and every now and then he'd send me, "Are you falling asleep?"
No, I'm just bouncing back and forth.
Oh, he's just tuning in carefully. Yes, all right. Anyway, he used to outline some of these experiences with me. Well, in coming up into, I guess it was around about 2010 of 2012, I had an experience talking with Christ Michael of Nebadon, who was outlining the original plan for BRICS, which is now, it was 4 countries at the time, and he said that they were sending out emissaries to 180 more countries to bring them into a humanitarian economic structure for the benefit of mankind rather than for. So anyway, it's now like 209 countries, but he outlined the whole plan in I guess it was December 10th of 2012 is what I was trying to get at. Well, now we're all the way around to April of 2014, and my friend in Uganda sends an email and said, I had a really interesting experience last night. He said, I was talking to a higher dimensional being. He described the same guy. He described Michael absolutely perfect. There's no doubt it was him. Everything was the same. And he said, and he outlined a number of things to me. And when he finished, I said, my goodness, I must tell this to Delanova. And he said, the being said, say hello to Delanova for me while he waves with his right hand.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, don't forget, I haven't seen a radionic ship since I've been in Brantford, which is like 14 or 15 months, whatever it was, 14 or 15 months. Anyway, one morning I looked out about 11 days later and wall to wall, huge, perfect, brilliant. Right out the
Radionic.
back window there was a radionic. Well, the light bulb didn't go off.
Yeah.
When I got up the next morning, it was still there and the light bulb went off. So I went out and waved with my right hand. And it's been on ever since.
Yeah, I wave too
I,
to them all the
I have,
time. Hey, how's it going?
yep. Well, that's what I did. I waved with my right hand.
Hey.
So that also brings to bear a lot of what's going on because within the radionic radiation stuff, there's the intelligent design and creation and the Revelatorium. Originally, it was just the Revelatorium, and this is all the way up until about uh, 2017 or so. But it had become 450 odd pages and stuff still coming through all the time, so it become unwieldy. So I decided to split it into the intelligent design and creation, all of that stuff in one book, and everything else left is the Revelatorium. And the interesting thing, there was probably only 20 pages difference between the two books. It split perfectly, see? So that's why there's now the intelligent design and creation, which is, you need that before you do the Revelatorium, because in the original merged book, I mean, you had the stuff going, coherently between the chapters. Well, now you had to set this up. Now you should read this before you read that, because this has some mysteries that are answered for you before. See? And then I wasn't the guy that was supposed to have done that. I mentioned that my brother had been doing this math physics stuff. Well, in the summer of '68, a fellow on Robson Street in downtown Vancouver, it was like his haunt. He used to walk up and down Robson Street where the coffee houses and stuff were. Passed on to my brother what he called diamond equation. If you take an equilateral triangle and an equilateral triangle and you put the two together, you got a diamond.
Yeah.
So my brother took that and he started putting, it's like a fractal. You can put as many diamonds, equilateral triangles without end. So, but he discovered that if you took that line to be, I'm just making this up, but you took that to be, say, the orbit of Mars, and you took this line over here to be the weight of Jupiter. If you divided this by that, you'd have the mass of Saturn, Well, he ended up doing a whole particle theory, all of the, right down to the pheromones and everything, plus on the other side, the entire solar system and all that stuff, based on these calculations with his pocket calculator. Yeah. And I'd already said how accurate they were because he was cranking up the fine structure constant years in advance of their supercomputers. Exactly. See? So, but he got locked into it. That's what he did from that point on. He just, all day long, he just did these calculations, So when it came time to do the Revelatorium in the end of the 90s, he couldn't be the one to do it because anything that would come through would go off into his math physics.
Yeah.
So the whole job was palmed off. I don't mean this in a demeaning way. I'm really grateful it happened, but it was palmed off onto me. In this way, I was sleeping one night and the voice said, "We are giving you a new responsibility because I can't do it because it's been compromised by it." Well, when I woke up, my brother and I at the time had an antivirus business, in the third dimension. And I was in charge of the business side. He was in charge of the technical side. So he decided he wasn't going to do that anymore and it left. So I thought the technical side was being handed to me. We are giving you a new responsibility. See, that's what I thought it meant. Well, about 6 months later, I think I'd mentioned this in one of the earlier books, but in '75, when this family thing was going on, I had sat down at a typewriter and typed out a page and a half of the Tree of Life, tying the 12 signs of the zodiac to the 12 chakras, because at the time, the Eastern mystics only talked about 7. So I put down on paper, there was actually 12. Here they are. That's how I learned how to type. It took me hours to peck away, character at a time. Anyway, that was in '75, and that was it. It stayed that way. And I decided all of a sudden to revamp that, maybe with what I knew now and what I'd learned over maybe flush it out a wee bit more. So I set up the computer, set up a new file, and I was going to type the Tree of Life, but I typed thumbnails. And I started one at a time, bullets, boom, 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 boom. Well, thumbnails are now the second last chapter, both the intelligent design and, the Revelatorium.
Yeah, the thumbnails and then the cosmic quotations too.
Yeah. So anyway, I got about 60 of them down. The next day, I started taking every one of the bullets and did a sentence. Then I went back and did a paragraph. And then I started to see where they were linked together. This one that was linked with that one. And that's how the stargrams got started. I started grouping them, and that's how the Revelatorium got started eventually. Yeah. And I eventually put up, I think it was about a 95-page version in the very beginning of 1999. That's when it first went up. Well, it just kept expanding, and then since I got all the way up to 450, I had to split it. As we speak right now, I've just done a revision of both. I've finished spell checking and reading through for tweaks the intelligent design. I've done spell checking of the Revelatorium, and I'm just partway through as we speak. I cut it off to make this interview of the Revelatorium. So before too much longer, there'll be new versions of those two books up. Then I can start with the radionic ships, because the same thing has happened there. From the original start in 2014, by the spring of 2016, I had about 60 photographs. The odd one I got off the internet too, and I'd put it up as a final chapter at the end of the Revelatorium.
Yeah.
And it just kept going. So now I pulled it out. Now it's its own book. Well, the next thing you know, it's already 450 pages and bursting at the seams. So I'm splitting it up into volume 1 and volume 2.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to be doing next, starting probably in about 2 weeks. It's a tough job too, because first volume 1 is going to deal mostly with the cloud aspects of the radionic ships, these things that I talk about. And the second book is going to deal with, I call them the condensations. These are the moistures, that are the cloud. The ship itself sucks the water moisture together, so you see the ship where the ship is sitting, but it's made out of water vapor, and you can throw a ball to it, like the silver molybdenite that I was telling you about. So the second book is going to deal with those kind of ships, the mobile ones, plus the portals, plus all of the perforania that go on.
Mother ships and anchor ships and
scout
ships.
That's all in the first book, but there are also versions of them that you can actually see. The big I've got a couple pictures of actually solid-looking cylinders. The square at the ends. But these are condensations. The baseball through them, even though they reflect light almost perfectly as a 3D object, but they're in the fourth dimension still. Yeah. So that'll be the second book, and then the next book after that, and one of the chapters in the current radionic ship book is called Sylphs, which are the fourth dimensional, halfway between animals and consciousness. I've got now, I had probably 40 photographs when that was done, but I now have over 250 really good photographs of Sylphs. So there's another book. The Palladian Fleet have now been moved up. Instead of being a problem, they're now part of the answer.
Yeah.
So I've got some really good information on that, which is now going to be the fifth book. Actually, it'll be the fifth book, and the Sylphs will be the sixth book. And then I'm calling this talk that we're having now. I've got a website called uber.com. About Uber taxi and Uber everything. Well, why not Uber? See. And I was thinking of using it to sell multi-million-dollar yachts and $50 million estates and so on. I'm going to use it Uber. This is a good name for this story. It's the Uber story of how the radionic revelations, Revelatorium radiations came into being. So that's the title of this of that. Now I don't have anything up there yet, but it's going to be called Uber, UBER, Uber.com.
So,
So just to let you know in advance. So,
well, geez, I
I
don't know if I should publish this episode then, because someone might try to take that name, Uber.com.
well, no, do it now because I want to do the radionic ships pretty soon, and I want people to not jump at me. I'm trying to think if there's any other. Oh yeah, there are a couple other stories I can tell you. They're not necessarily cosmically related, but in their own right. Again, like how the fuck did you know that? This kind of stuff. When in '76, I was in Halifax selling flowers. I did flowers through bars and restaurants, through this family action in the '70s, all the way up until about '83 or '84. That's how I lived, and you always had money in your pocket, You saw all the bands. It was not a bad life at all. No bosses, you're the boss. So, but anyway, I was in Halifax, Dartmouth, in Nova Scotia, and I went into the Matador at about 9:30 one night. That on a Sunday night, that was my first run, and then I'd come back later about 2:00 because the Matador ran at 3. Everybody else closed at 2. So that's where the action was, and I would sell up his spot full of flowers between 2 and 3, at the Matador. Anyway, my brother was up in Whitehorse at this point in the Northwest Territories, selling flowers up there. So anyway, about 9:30, the Matador had 2. Oh, there's a story here too. There was 2 floors. The main floor was the Country West, and the second floor was the rock and roll. The story thing is that when I was selling flowers through the Country Western one night, there was 4 guys sitting at a table that were fishermen from Newfoundland. They were heading to sea the next day, so they were partying out, the night before they left. And they had black shrouds around them. The death shroud, you hear the story of people seeing black. Yeah. I've seen it twice, both at the Matador. So here's the 4 of them sitting with black shrouds around them. And 3 days later, there was a ship, a fishing boat with 4 lost at sea in a storm. So that was that. Now, one night upstairs in the rock and roll bar, there was a band playing from Texas, and they were doing Captain Tennille's hits, I can't remember the name of it already. And I thought it was their song. It was a really good song. I said, boy, these guys are really good. Anyway, the singer had jet black hair. The lady singer had jet black hair. Well, there was a band break, and she was at the bar. As it went by, she had brilliant blonde hair. Committed suicide that night.
Oh, wow.
Which is really sad. Nobody knows why, but she did. But there it was. I'd seen her black shroud on stage, so, oh, jeez. Anyway, so these things go on. I mean, there are people that see this kind of stuff routinely. Well, I've seen it off and on. It's not like my routine, as it were.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Caesar
anyway,
gets that.
Anyway,
Carter gets that too. Seeing the black cloud thing around people that are gonna die or whatever.
Yeah. The story I was starting to tell was that my brother was up in Whitehorse in the Northwest Territories, and I'm going through the Matador Sunday night, downtown Dartmouth, and I see 4 guys come in with blue jumpsuits. Well, moving crews were coming and going.
Yeah.
And there were always 4 or 5 together, and they're always wearing blue jumpsuits. These, moving crews. See, well, so it's a moving crew. See, so anyway, they sat down at the center of the bar. I finally worked my way around their table. I said, "And you guys like to buy a rose?" I got this big bucket of roses. It's dark, Well, if I'd thrown a live grenade into the middle of the table, they couldn't have come out of there faster because they just leaped to their feet and started screaming. Their eyes were out like points, like Al Cap used to do in Little Abner, and their hair was up like a rooster. And tables and chairs and drinks and everything went flying in all directions. Of course, everybody thought it was a big one going on, so they're all on their feet ready to go. Yeah. And I hear Whitehorse. Oh, this moving crew. They had bought flowers for my brother in Whitehorse. They think it's me. No, it was you. No, and I'm incoherent. One of the guys says, "I'll be back." He comes back a few minutes later. He says, "All right, guys, sit down." He says, "I got the story." Well, the Canadian snowbirds, the jet, like the
Yeah.
bluebirds in the States, the snowbirds had done a show in Whitehorse Saturday afternoon. They'd gone to the bars that night, bought flowers from my brother. The next day at lunch, my brother had gone into the restaurant, the hotel restaurant for lunch. He was buds with the owner who was sitting with the snowbirds. And he said, oh, sit down and join us. So for an hour and a half, my brother sat and had lunch with the snowbirds.
Yeah.
All right, lads, we got our next show to get to, and it was nice. And off they went. Well, the part I like is that they flew at 900 miles an hour across Canada. See, Halifax and Dartmouth, or Halifax and Whitehorse are 4,500 miles as the crow flies, straight as an arrow. Yeah. Well, they came straight across at 900 miles an hour. The part I like is that they fueled in midair over North Bay. At 7 that night, they came into the Shearwater Air Force Base in Dartmouth, did the show, landed, freshened up, had a bite to eat and so on, grabbed a cab, went down to the Matador at 9:30, and there I am selling flowers. They thought I'd teleported because they had been 7.5 hours in the air because they're going into this, going into the sun and the clock is climbing. And they had just shaken my hand before they took off 4,500 miles in that direction. And they thought I'd teleported. See? So I figure in 100 trillion years of circumstances, that particular one could, because I forgot to mention, my brother and I were peas in a pod. We were identical. We were considered identical twins, but more than that, we were considered mirror twins because we were identical. But if you stand in a mirror, one's left-handed, the other's right-handed. Well, I'm left-handed. He was right-handed. We were mirror twins. And then if you're standing in a dimly lit bar with a big bucket of roses, I could be 6 feet and he could be 3 feet. And to a half-drunk patron, you'd still look like the same. So add all that together, they thought I teleported. Now, the end of that story is that in Canada Day, I guess it would be 65. I'm now in Ottawa selling flowers in the market area for Canada Day. And they showed up in one of the Irish bars. So I had a chance to tell them, of course, it wasn't the same guys by far, totally new crew, but I had to tell them the story of, if you ever heard them talking about it, that's straighten the story up for them. So,
yeah.
So that's probably basically it. I can tell you a lot about, finish off with this, how the information is coming through. I don't hear voices talking to me and I write it down as fast as I can. That's channeling. Yeah. Channeling are most of the time from the outer consciousness of the negative entities, either in the spaceships, the negative spaceships, or negative consciousness in the intelligence in the fourth dimension, but to the outer consciousness of the recipient. It's a telepathic connection straight through. And they're telling that recipient stuff that they want them to pass on to humanity for their own purposes, whatever it might be. Yeah. There's an interesting aspect to that. Again, we're talking about the teachings back at the beginning of the 70s, and after the first couple of lectures that were given, and I guess it was in the second translation class that he gave, this would be around March or so, one of the parties that came to it and became one of the stalwart 15 that, had been fairly famous in Vancouver for being a, Yoda was, now, I don't know if it's the same Yoda, but I suspect it might be. And he did a lot better the next time around, But anyway, Yoda was this was in 1970. Yoda was, and he'd write furiously about 5 or 6 pages from Yoda. He's going, another message from Yoda. Let me read it, There's a couple of things in there that weren't bad. In fact, I use one sentence in it out of all of that stuff in the Revelatorium, and that's that creation radiates in parallel lines at 90 degrees to the creators.
Yeah.
That came out of one of Yoda's things, but it was the only one out of all of them that stuck. I saw that and just hit. That's true, the only thing. So, but anyway, So now his name was Daryl. So now Daryl's coming into the family for the lectures and so on. And after the first couple of lectures, David goes over to Daryl and says, "Oh yeah, and by the way, get rid of that Yoda." So that's how respectfully these channeling operations are considered in the higher dimensions. Oh yeah, get rid of that Yoda.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I noticed you mentioned the Palladian Fleet. So does that change the opinion of Ashtar there, or is it
oh
still
well, yeah, when
is it still kind
the,
of a hee-haw kind of?
yeah phew, that's a sticky issue, because the static negative coming off of that is like plutonium, every touch gets plutoniumized. Anyway, when the Roswell ship, the idea of spaceships first started happening, this guy in California said, "Well, if there's space up there, maybe we can communicate with them telepathically." Well, of course, these guys up there are just dying for that kind of a connection to occur, So they hooked up with this guy immediately, and that became the Ashtar Command. I am Ashtar, the commander in chief of the. And then they hijacked the whole radionic fleet that's outside the orbit of Jupiter. The millions and millions. The Ashtar Command is a vast fleet of ships outside of they hijacked the whole show. There's actually about maybe a dozen of them altogether in what was called the Ashtar Command, but they are 100, and the static involved with those guys is just unbelievable. The negative static.
Yeah.
The they were given the boot about maybe a year and a half ago. The whole Ashtar Command was given the boot off the planet. But there were also Pleiadians on the other side of the coin that were from positive, third dimensional planets, and they came with the right intention, but without understanding what was going on because they weren't part of the big loop. Yeah. So they saw humanity as a race that had evolved out of the ocean, now ready, coming into higher consciousness, now ready to be able to make the jump up and do a galactic community. So they're able to make mankind do that jump without realizing that what's actually going on, mankind is being raised back up into the fifth dimension where they fell down from, so they could be brought back into the galactic community where they were booted out of by quarantine. Yeah. See, so that's where the Palladians are a little bit. But anyway, they showed a dispensation or willingness to work with, under command of the radionic ships and so on is helpful. So that whole aspect of that Palladian side was enormously opened up in September of last year, not this September, but the year before, when a huge fleet came in through the sun. I've got it's called Palladianfleet.com. It's a fairly small website called Palladianfleet.com. But because I was watching the solar flares in the sun, I caught a picture, poop, it suddenly showed up one day of the portal.
Yeah.
Just sitting there. And it rotated off the limb. I didn't know at the time what it was. I just said, that's radionic, because it was a perfect radionic formation, not clouds, but of the condensated type.
Yeah.
Sitting right in the middle of this solar hole, whatever they call it. Well, anyway, and it rode off limb. Well, all of a sudden, this was on about a Wednesday. On the Saturday, all 6 of the solar observatories around the world were shut down on the same day.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, the excuse given was that they found pornography on the laptops. Well, they had to come up with something. Well, the reason why is because the fleet had come through the portal, and it was sitting there off the limb of the sun, this vast Palladian fleet. See, but a lady down in Salem, Indiana, I think it's Indiana, had a small backyard observatory, and she'd photographed it and put it up on RENs. Well, I spotted it about 2 hours after she put it up. I said, well, I'll be damned. There it is. See?
Yeah.
So if you go to the Palladianfleet.com, right at the beginning, you'll see that.
Yeah.
That presentation. So the Palladian Fleet are now good guys. They're now working in adjunct with the radionic ships, and it turns out that they have their own unique signatures, just like the radionic ships do. They're completely different. So he had all kinds of photographs where I keep talking about the radionic ships are they're the left goes this, the middle goes that, and the right goes that. They're like the
Yeah.
palms of a hand. Peacock tails. But I also had all kinds of where they're perfectly parallel. Or there's a line with parallel lines on either side. I said,
Yeah.
I couldn't put them into the radionic ship picture. Well, those are the Pleiadians because they don't. The radionic ships are monopole, but there's always two so that they connect together magnetically as a proper magnetic field. But that's why the lines are radial because they flow from one to the other. But the Palladian ships are positive pole, negative pole in the same ship.
Yeah.
So that's why the lines are this way or that way or this way or that way. They're parallel lines, not radial magnetic field type lines. So I've gone back into I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Palladian ships there. I didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
So that's when I finished with the radionic ships, I can now do a much bigger version of the Palladian. That'll be I think that's the fifth book. That's going to be the fifth book. I got work ahead of me for the next year and a half.
Yes, lots of work. Lots of work to be done.
Yep.
So I believe you got the subject down pretty good for tonight's episode.
The other final thing is that the way that a lot of this information has come through. See, a lot of it is I suddenly like I would ask, what is gravity? There's quite a bit in the design and creation about gravity, what gravity is. What is gravity? Well, I went about 2 or 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, there it was. And it would take weeks and weeks to flush it out into a language that you can follow, but it was the pure thought. See, it just boom, in it comes. But I also had, and I still get them. If I see when I know that there's going to be more information coming through in a couple of days, I call them inductions. Other people have also called them inductions.
Yeah.
But one of the good ones, if you recall, well, here's the idea. You take about 60 TV screens, and like you see science fiction movies, you see 60 TV screens. They all have different pictures in them. Well, now you take each picture and it fades in, comes out, fades in, comes out, fades in, comes in. They're all doing different pictures and they're fading in, coming out, fading in. And all 6 of them are doing that. This is really busy. Well, I'll see that going on. Say, and sure enough, the next couple of days, whole new thought pops through. See, another one is the idea from Star Trek with Data downloading the computer from the Klingon ship into their ship, and it's like a cascade of info falling. Well, I'll see that sometimes. This cascade of information going through. Sure enough, a couple of days later. The interesting one, when I was talking about these in and out ones and so on, I had one. It was actually 2 or 3 of them all together. Oh, this is another story too, where my brother's involved. But anyway, the popping in and out, it wasn't. It was maybe like 20 TV screens, but it was Nazi symbols. That's actually an ancient Earth language. I knew the name of it. I can't find it. I can't remember. But it was preceding the Sanskrit. But the Nazi symbols, that's actually a language. So anyway, and all of a sudden there's the Luciferian rebellion of the cosmic overplus. This is what they did. I knew that they'd done it, didn't know what they did. See, there's the whole thing in the show. And there was 2 times that information came through, or one time in particular that information came through. This would be back about 2002, 2003. My brother was sitting in his computer. I walked by, and out of the side of his mouth, he said, "Far out, the universe is bifurcating." Well, I knew about the Luciferian rebellion. I knew what the cosmic overplus is without knowing what it was exactly and why. I knew that it was a new creation going on in Andromeda. I knew it was on the intelligent side to start with, and I knew it was on the female side of it, but I didn't have the connections of any of that. See, far out, the universe is bifurcating. Well, it's like a pinata. All that info was up there, and somebody hit it with a bat. Down it came in one shot. Well, it took 6 months to sort it all out, but you read it now pretty well as it was. And it was my brother that. See, that's the way it works. You've got stuff sitting up there, and it just needs a single thread to get up there. It's like lightning, like lightning doesn't just decide to hit the ground. There's a little stream like with one electron wide or something that'll go up.
Yeah.
And it sets up the channel that the bolt comes down. See, well, this is the same thing from your outer consciousness to the inner. You get a line that connects, and down comes the Padada. Well, that comment that my brother had made was the line that. See, so now I've got pretty well the whole of the new creation sorted out, except near the end there was a whole pile of. Then they do this, then they do that, and it was just a mishmash. And I'd spent a couple of months trying to sort out the mishmash without being happy about it. I know it's not right. I don't know what it is. Oh, there's that's what's. Anyway, I'm sleeping one night, and one of the other fellows from the family at the time shows up. He opens the filing cabinet. He starts moving all the file folders around. I said, "Oh, no, you're mixing everything all up."
Yeah.
And I woke up, and the next day, the mishmash started to nicely sort itself out. What he'd gone is. So there's another way that the interdimensional stuff works. Somebody else came in and helped straighten up the confusion for me. See,
Yeah.
So there it was, and now you read it as as the filing cabinet resort and so on. And that's basically how a lot of this stuff is going on. Like I just had one even probably 2 days ago. Now it's not like monumental news, but like I'm rewriting. As I say.
Yeah.
Oh well, there's a paragraph there that and I have to add 3 or 4 more sentences into that paragraph or another thought to add to that. So it's smaller stuff coming in, but it's still building the picture. So.
Yeah.
And I don't see it ever going to end. I don't see it ever going to end. 1,000 years from now, this might be a 1,500-page volume.
It could possibly be, honestly. You never know. Once Christ, Michael incarnates again, there's another.
Well, he's slated unless things change, and I haven't heard anything about different. We were told that in 1970 thereabouts. See, there's a new land rising out in the mid-Pacific, and that he will walk again amongst his people in the third dimension on hallowed ground. Is how it was said. So that's slated for 2070. Now, Michael has been back in and out, in the fourth dimension. Like as it says, I will be like a thief in the night. You won't know. And he's been in and out. The first time for sure that I knew he was around was in 93 when I was living back in Ottawa. And I was taxi for 3 days. Now, this is when, remember I said that Satan had passed and brought all their Return of the Feet of Christ and brought up. Well, he was there for that because that was a big one. Well, they can't just roam around unattached. No matter who you are, they have to be somewhere in. So people act as taxis. Like I mentioned, the soul atom musician from whatever planet it was with Mother Tuckers and Amethyst. They have to be, in a consciousness that accepts them properly. Well, I was taxi for Christ Michael for 3 days. I think it was 93. I'm pretty sure it was 93. Anyway, I knew about that. And then, of course, I talked with him face to face and in the near the end of 2012. So had Nathan in Uganda in April of 2014. So he's been and gone. He's not. I don't think. No, he's not around right now. But see, nobody knows. See, here's the whole thing. His whereabouts are being kept under wraps, so the negative can't do anything. It's like Trump, Trump's got stuff up his sleeve, but nobody knows what it is. Well, Michael's got stuff up his sleeve, and nobody knows what it is. Ever since 2,000 years ago, his whereabouts have not been known in general. So.
Pretty well, Yeah, it's pretty wild, honestly.
So I'm just a fairly tuned in, foot on the ground, foot soldier, army of Christ, like a whole pile of people,
Yeah.
I was 10 years. Most of the family, Christ that got together in the early 70s were 10 years younger. I mean, that was a whole pile of them were all the same age, all of the age of 20. I was the age of 30. My brother and I were the age of 30. We were slightly ahead. Now, that's another thing to mention here. That whole episode should have been in the thousands upon thousands upon thousands. By their works ye shall know them. It's because in 61, the party had come up from. So he had a walk in a Melchizedek walking occurred in '56 in Denver, and he accepted the role of being the taxi and not being, you know, the whoopie doo, because
Yeah.
another walk-in had occurred in, oh god, I get this right, '71, with a guy down in Berkeley who was at the time working with the CIA, watching what the radical students were doing and reporting back. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I walk in there. Now he was supposed to have been a big one, Melchizedek, but he didn't let go, and so he's well known. He's got books out all over the place. His initials are, I don't want to name him, but it's first name starts with a D, and his last name is Melchizedek, and he is probably put out just about everything that could be known about to the top end of the fourth dimension, but not over the fold. And he's not in the big picture because he tuned himself out by not accepting responsibility to let his Melchizedek Adam do the work or call the
Yeah.
shots. See, which is too bad. He was brought up into the family to meet in '71. We were all told to stay away for 3 days because in case he was still working for the CIA,
Yeah.
so that wouldn't give up any secrets there. But he was shown the whole show, and the same as the guy, and I'll get back to this one in '61, and walked away. What happened in '61? The guy was shown the whole cosmic plan for the elect of Christ to come together and you know uh, push humanity up into the fifth dimension where it should be. And he at the time was already um, playing around with Rosicrucians, I Am Society, the Theosophical Society. He looked in and out of all of them and had little bits and pieces. And he couldn't see anything different being said there than what he was hearing over there. So he shrugged his shoulders to it.
Yeah.
So David is the fellow that was masterly minding all this stuff. Well, he had to take it under helm himself. He spent about 2 years trying to get it going in Hamilton and couldn't, so he moved out to Vancouver. Then he lived out there for 10 years, couldn't get it going, and eventually moved up to Nelson where the band was and got the band together and started, and then had come down to Vancouver to give some lectures. And that's when, about altogether, there's about 70 of us got involved into the lectures to a point where we didn't just sit to a lecture and never come back. But there was only about 15 that actually stayed with it all the way because it's a tough road to hoe. You have to let go of your third dimension completely. That's what the vision I'd seen is the people being knocked out of by not passing the test correctly.
Yeah.
Basically, the same idea as people being knocked out of the picture for not accepting responsibility properly, to let go of the third dimensional stuff.
Yeah.
So that's probably about pretty close to all of it.
Yeah, you did.
Something else just goes.
You got a good portion of it.
I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, you got a pretty damn good portion of it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do remember a few of what you said there because you've said it spaced out through the episodes, bits and pieces here and there and stuff like that. So if to all those who are listening, this is a more of a compendium type for the specific episode.
Yeah.
But it has been said throughout the episodes, but this is a all-in-one episode kind of thing where for the story of the
the story of how the
Revelatorium
revelations came to be. Here I am today talking to you. So.
Yeah, man, it's getting to be a good tongue twister, I tell you.
Yeah, I guess so. Uber is the simple name. I was going to call it the. I can't even remember. I had a name picked. Can't remember what it was now. And then I've owned Uber for 2 or 3 years. What the heck to do with it? He said, "Oh, hey, wait, man, that's a perfect name to use." So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, perfect. Hey, I like it. That's pretty good.
I mean, even nobody has any idea when they see what the heck is Uber.
Yeah.
Well, that's worth a check. Let's see.
Yeah, hey, I never know. It could always be good clickbait.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be good, I believe. Just like I believe in the Revelatorium, it's been absolutely outstanding,
Yeah.
honestly. Like, and then the illuminations and everything, and the further you go into it, the more you get. And I just like doing the getting rid of the animal crystallized memory engrams and start using your induction discharge all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
See, it's very and that's another thing too, is why, like, with my independent energy, everybody always expected me to have like mountains of books, right? Books upon books and books of
Yeah, that was the
designs.
thing. I never read anything. That was why I was a perfect pick because I had nothing in my brain that would divert the info.
Yeah,
I hadn't learned a whole pile of stuff here and off it would go. I had nothing. I was clean as a whistle. And they also knew that I wouldn't, that I had no outer ego, um, wishes, for to be famous for this. I mean, a lot of these people do this. I mean, you read their website. I am, and they go through a page and a half of who they are and what they're doing, so that you can be impressed with them enough to believe what they're telling you, because
yeah,
most of what they're telling you is not worth believing. But I was, because I had no outer interest not to use it to make money out of it. Now I'm going to make money out of it to live with and do more stuff with, but I'm not going to buy a big yacht and big fast car. And I
yeah.
live in a single room, but it's a big room and it's a nice room. But I live in a single room. I have no need for, I'm a suitcase guy, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to change that. You know,
Minimalist.
and they knew all that in advance, that I'd be a good host for it. So
Yeah.
I'd do the right thing. So, and I'm doing the right thing, I hope.
Oh, we're doing good, man. Like, from the
Well, as a
stuff I
matter of fact,
saw.
I call myself the wordsmith. You won't see me as the author in any of the books, even once. I never call myself the author because I'm not the author. I'm the
Yeah.
wordsmith. You know, it
No,
took
I
me a
think
while to
we.
figure out to call myself the wordsmith. I didn't know
Mm,
what to call myself. You know,
yeah.
but
Yeah, I
wordsmith
don't.
is good because that's what I am. I get the thought, and it's my job to put it into words that you can read. You know?
Yeah.
So now I was well trained because, like I say, I did this book in 1970, which is still sitting in the archives there somewhere. I don't have access to it, but in the
Yeah.
family archive. And in the late 90s, started in 96, I wrote 900 pages autobiography, all on the humor side. And people that read, they consider it a good read, but it's
Yeah.
dated now. I mean, it was 20 years ago. But that's where I got my chops. Actually, sure, I already had a hint of chops. I did. I started UBC in '61 doing honors math and physics, and in my second year, I dropped some of the physics. I dropped the chemistry. I took a philosophy course
Yeah.
and liked it. And in my third year, I did honors math on this side and honors philosophy on that side. And in my fourth year, I did nothing but philosophy. I dropped even the math.
Yeah.
But in one of the seminars in my fourth year, I did an essay and I got an A double plus for it, which is the only A double plus the department had ever given. So my writing skills were already inherent
Yeah.
without knowing it. You know?
Yeah, it all seems to be playing out pretty good here, and
Yeah, yeah.
I can feel the Revelatorium being digested by the human consciousness. So,
Well, you digest. Yeah, well, that's what it's for.
yeah,
So I'm waiting for the day when. Oh, that's another thing too. I found out just recently, and when I mean recently, about 3 days ago, there's a printing company in Montreal. See, right now it's printed one of two ways. You go print on demand, like with Amazon, Lulu, and these. And when the order comes in, the laser printer spits it out. And in particular, it's full color. Like Radionic ships is 450 pages in full color. Well, if you've done a 8.5 by 11 at Staples, or Business Depot, you know how expensive that is. So they won't let me sell the book for under $85.
yeah,
So the trick is, and it would be vastly better quality to have it printed by offset.
yeah,
The printing costs would bring it down to where the book could sell for $29. and I would make $8 or $10 per book instead of like $1.50 that I'm making now. So that's always been the plan, to be able to get it off onto an offset one of these days. Well, there's a company in Montreal that figured that there's a gap to fill between, and when you do an offset, you have to start at 1,000 or 1,200 copies because they don't want to even clean the rollers for less than that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And you have to pay up front. You have to pay in advance. So it's a huge difference between one book at a time. You don't pay in advance, but the cost is astronomical versus 1,100 or 1,200 books at one shot with a huge upfront cost, but the net individual costs are low. See?
Yeah.
Well, these guys said, well, look, so they will print 100, 200, 300 copies, fast turnover, electronically, i.e. through laser, but with a machinery that they've set up that will print at the quality of a offset.
Yeah.
Which is the part I like, because that was always the thing. The Amazon books were very poor quality, but these guys will print with and the cost will not be high. I can sell it like the Revelatorium and the Intelligent Design. I can sell them for $29.95 and still make $10 each, which will allow me to print twice as many, you know. And that's so I'm ready to do that within the next couple of weeks at the most. Now anybody can throw anything in my direction to help me do that, you know.
Yeah.
Will be hugely, you know, accepted with great gratitude. I've got enough. I borrowed, I made a loan of enough to do this first printing, but it's at 39%.
Ouch.
Yes, and I'm
That's
paying.
like,
I'm paying the monthly premiums out of my old age pension, which is not leaving a whole lot left for hot dogs and hamburgers, you know. But I'm doing it, and if that's the way it has to go, that's the way it'll be. But anything anybody can do, even, you know, big or small. If somebody wants to throw 100,000 at me, I'll take that with huge, because now I can really start to swing a bat, you know.
Oh, that'd be like,
because it's not just getting the books printed. You have to promote them too. Well, the more money I've got in the kitty, the more promotions I can do, you know. And that's the next part. But I've got enough to print the books. I just don't have enough to do much in the way of promotions, you know.
Yeah.
Like, here's a good example. You have these lectures going up on the Brightian platform, but there's 20 platforms that it could also go up on exactly the same way, which somebody has to do. You don't have the time. I don't know how to do it. A few bucks in the kitty will hire somebody that can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of work if you're posting on.
It is. But that's a perfect example. That's as good an example as any. You know, and it's also the same with the social medias. You know, I mean, as much as Facebook and Twitter and all these guys are really bad news, as it were, my stuff isn't a problem for them. But somebody has to know how to do it. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Well, Twitter and stuff like that, they don't know it's a problem yet because they don't understand Revelatorium.
Well, no, it's political. It's the political stuff, you know, and that means all of the different aspects of, you know, the racism, all of those different things, hate crimes, and, you know, that stuff. It's the political stuff that they're dealing with. Everything else is fine. Same with Wikipedia. Everybody says, oh, you can't use your Wikipedia, it's not reliable. Well, it's 100% reliable as long as it's not political. And if it's political, it's absolutely worthless.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll call this episode, and and thank you, Del Star. It's always a pleasure with you here at these lectures / discussions.
Here too.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. It really is. It makes you feel good in your Christ Center.
Yeah.
And well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. We are in the golden age. I'm your host, Peter Ross of the Milk Family. Del Star, always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Have yourself a very good evening, and thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for more.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. More next week.
Right. Sure.
Absolutely.
All right.